All right, folks, we're going to get started with the event today. I know a lot of people will be trickling in because there's these giant lines outside, but bear with us. We have folks that need to run, so we're going to get started. So good morning. My name is Alan McQuinn. I am a senior policy analyst with the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. We're a nonprofit public policy think tank dedicated to the intersection of technology and public policy. I would like to welcome you to today's event, How Policymakers Can Support Blockchain-Based Innovation and Consumer Protection. Before we begin, a few logistical notes. The event will be recorded and we'll be posting it on our website later. That's itif.org. We will also have some time for Q&A at the end, so please feel free to have your questions ready and I'll come to you. And you can follow along with the discussion on Twitter at ITIF blockchain. That's ITIF blockchain. To begin, I'd like to thank the Congressional Blockchain Caucus for hosting this event for us. And we're delighted to have several of the co-chairs here today to share a few remarks about the blockchain issues that Congress is working on and how they're looking at this technology. I'd like to welcome up our first speaker today, Representative David Schweikert from Arizona. Would you like to come on up?
Am I okay not coming behind the microphone?
Yeah, go ahead.
Look, a number of the faces here are familiar. I have one of the, can I just refer to you as the freaky smart guy? We do a number of things in Arizona. I want to, look, as the panel, you're the expert. A couple principles and a couple things we're driving and a couple of the frustrations, a couple of the frustrations that those of us who are sort of great advocates of what a distributed ledger can be and trying to move. First principle, as American citizens, the data government holds, is it yours? If you're a sovereign, I want, and another reason I hate these things, no, it's an honest conversation worth having. And we were just touching on this, but as a principle, should you be able to go on something like a distributed ledger, look up and say, hey, here's what the Park Service has, here's what this has, here's what this has, on you as a U.S. citizen. And if it's held properly in a distributed ledger or blockchain, you would actually get to see who's been pinging you, who looks at your data. Because you can't substantially, when the coding is basically done right, you can't look at it without leaving a thumbprint. So besides just the basic efficiencies and elegance of having my health record, my VA records, my this, that, in a single portal to make my life much more efficient, how about the idea of also saying, why is my ex-wife who now works at the Park Service somehow looking up the fact that I have a cabin lease and looks at me every 6 weeks? I know it sounds odd, but there is a certain elegance to this concept of, we talk about data privacy, but do you really have data privacy if you have no idea who's looking at you? So, and that's just one of the elegance that can be woven in here. One of the things we're advocating, and just a quick thought experiment, and then I'll get out the door because I have a joint economic. From a certain efficiency, how many of you live in a state where very soon you can't use your driver's license to get onto an airplane? Because it doesn't meet Real ID. You've heard me do this multiple times, but I'm trying to sell the concept. Okay, so in Arizona, in the next 17 months, we're going to have 4 million Arizonans have to go into a DMV office and take their driver's license and their birth certificate and their passport or something saying, I need the little gold star on my driver's license so I can get onto an airplane so my driver's license meets Real ID. If you're going to do that, what an amazing opportunity to say, well, why don't we, if we're going to actually know truly that this is you, why wouldn't we build that on a chain? Because if blockchain's core elegance is bulletproof ID of who you are, and you have an obligation in a state to actually do that, then think of the attributes you can start adding to it. Here's my hunting license. Here's, set up different levels of permission. So if I wanted to have my last 10 years of my state tax returns on it, it requires a biometric and a password. The fact that I have a real estate license doesn't need anything because that's already public record. You can look it up on the internet. This is coming in multiple states right now, and my intense dream, and this is one of the things we're truly working on here, is a revolution in EMRs, electronic medical records. If this is about to become your primary care physician with the sensors you wear on your body, you know, I'm a severe asthmatic. I've been playing with the oxygen sensor that in the morning tells me how much of my inhaled steroids I need to take. Turns out for things like that, technology is coming, we call it the flu kazoo. You blow into it and tells you if you have the flu. It needs to bounce off your medical records to make sure you're not allergic to this particular antiviral, as the algorithm orders your antivirals to be delivered by the autonomous vehicle to your house 2 hours later to crash the price of healthcare. I need medical records on this. I don't need them half sitting at a hospital, half sitting at my doctor's office, half sitting here at the physician of the house. It's absurd what we've allowed to happen to that data, and we finance the absurdity. The chain is a brilliant place to lock up the token that allows you to pull it off the cloud, that gives you different levels of permission. So if I'm bleeding out in an emergency room, they have a high level of permission to be able to access your medical records. But for a lot of the digital pharmaceuticals, the wearables to work, they have to have some place to deposit their latest, last 72 hours of data, and also the ability to, we're going to hit the point where the algorithm can prescribe, it needs to be able to bounce off your medical records to know that it's not prescribing something that you're allergic to or those things. I just threw about a dozen different concepts at you all at the same time, and I will make you argument it all ties together. For those of you who talk about blockchain, don't do what I was doing 2 years ago, where I was actually going to whiteboards and designing a node network and saying, hey, here's certified nodes, and here's my nodes that can escrow. And so these escrows would be, for latency. I actually, and I realized no one in the audience cared. Sell the benefits, because the benefits could be actually part of the revolution that's coming. Thank you for letting me stick my head in. Bye.
Thank you so much. I'd next like to welcome to the stage Representative Bill Foster. If you don't mind speaking to the mic.
We'll do the microphone.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Okay, sure. So I'm Congressman Bill Foster. I represent Illinois 11th District, the suburbs of Chicago. I also sometimes introduce myself as saying that I represent 100% of the strategic reserve of physicists in the United States Congress. Well, first off, I want to thank ITIF for hosting this. I'm also actually on financial services. We're standing up an artificial intelligence task force to deal with just the revolution. The giant banks are in the process of turning themselves into tech firms, and probably vice versa. And so that it's going to be a rather turbulent time for the next couple decades, both in financial services and tech. And blockchain is going to be an important part of that. When I think about what the long-term implications are, I think the fundamental one is simply the fact that there is a technological basis for a non-falsifiable ledger. That for things like land title registry, where you do not want to have someone go in and be able to steal your property by hacking a database, that's it's really the killer app. So things like land title registries, I think, will be the first things to fall. Crypto assets are a more interesting thing, because whenever you have a crypto asset, whether it's a currency or almost anything, some asset, there's sort of two questions that you have to answer. The first, is it truly anonymous in the way Bitcoin at least tries to be? And the second one, is there a mechanism to reverse a trade that happens under fraudulent or mistaken conditions? So the first one is you have to answer. My guess is that if things are truly anonymous, my guess is it's going to be politically untenable. The first time that there is a bioterror or nuclear terror or large value kidnapping, something like that, that the public will find it unacceptable that there are anonymous transfers of large. That's just my political reading, and you could wish that you lived in a different kind of political universe, but my guess is that's where we're going. So you have to start thinking about designing corresponding products where there is some way to find out who's behind some transaction. The second one is the question of can you bust a trade? That if something happens that is the dream of never having a trusted third party really going to work for high valued transactions in a modern economy? And that one is another one that you have to think about carefully. There's a number of famous examples. There's a guy who died owning a big Bitcoin vault, and so he died, and so the thing that you want to be able to do in that sort of circumstance is to say, I know I transferred my Bitcoin into that vault, but I want to reverse that trade and pull it back out because the guy died and the vault no longer exists. And so you have to go to a court that you trust or some equivalent of that. And I think that is a long-term competitive advantage of the United States and and probably Western Europe as well, is that we by and large have courts that people trust. And so that if you're going to, and there are a bunch of technological implications of that too. It means that you have to, if you say, okay, there will be a mechanism where we're going to fork the chain or we're going to reverse a trade, that has to be someone you trust. Are you really willing to go and put a large fraction of your net worth in any crypto asset where someone can go to a Chinese court and take it away from you? And so that is a fundamental thing that I think you're going to have to face, the anonymity and whether or not there's a mechanism for reversing it. That also means that the court that has the power to reverse that has to have some cryptographic backdoor on it, which is something that is painful words to hear for a lot of people here. But when I puzzle things out politically and imagine where it's going to go, I think that those are the two tough questions. The technology is very impressive. I think I first encountered it back in the 1990s with the fundamental patents on signature chaining, which came through with, I think, related to timestamps. The people that were, trying to produce websites where you could, affect timestamp in a reliable way a document. And the other thing that Representative Sykert mentioned has to do with secure digital ID, to who you are, how to represent who you are for things like digital contracts. And this is another fundamental issue. I think that there is actually a unique role of government in provisioning on secure digital ID. Because someone has to do it, and there is no one except a government you trust. You can't have businesses being able to generate synthetic IDs because we're already having problems with synthetic identity fraud. There's been a tremendous amount of progress on this in industry. There's the FIDO Alliance and the World Wide Web Consortium have just gone public with a set of software standards to go along with the hardware standard. That I read through their documents. I was quite impressed. They've addressed most of the issues, and it's now to the point where a government can simply plug into these standards. But then we actually have to have a mature discussion with the American public and the public around the world as to how this is actually going to work. Representative Schweikert mentioned electronic medical records. It is currently illegal to make an electronic health record system which has a unique identifier for all people in the United States. It's illegal. And this was due to a policy writer put onto an appropriations bill 20 years ago, my former colleague Ron Paul. And as far as I can tell, the reason was that he wanted to be able to go and buy a Viagra in the next county without his doctor finding out about it. Okay, because that's the problem you run into. If you have a unique identifier for anyone's medical records, it means you can walk into any clinic, you have an emergency situation, say, here's my, for example, Social Security number, and pull electronic health records from everywhere. Okay, that's sort of the dream, that's the efficient way to do it, but it relies on having a unique identifier for each person. And so we have to, I think, we have to have a serious discussion of that. Because the same thing's important for digital contracts. If you want to go, if you have a system in place where you're going to a court and you say, I'm sorry, this digital contract that works 99.9% of the time has to be reversed in this special instance, you have to authenticate yourself as being, the person some person withstanding to go to that court to reverse the results of a digital contract. And so this is, I think, you can see a lot of these discussions happening throughout industry. I think, the dream of having, no trusted third party, I think is, it's going to be tough to uphold when this starts to be used for high-valued transactions. I think there's a huge role for low-valued transactions, things like supply chain management, where the worst thing that gets happened if it's corrupted, then you have one set of, conflict diamonds that gets sent the wrong place. It's not something that will wreck our economy. So for supply chain, for low-valued transactions, I think there will be a huge market for the use of blockchain in a way that doesn't have you, have a trusted third party in the way, and that will make it much more efficient, easier, but has all the problems with disappearing Bitcoin and everything else that for those class of transactions. Anyway, so that's sort of where I see the state of play. There's about a million interesting technical things. I guess I'm not only the only physicist in Congress. I may be the only integrated circuit designer. I think that's pretty clear. I'm probably the only member who's designed a 100,000 ampere superconducting transmission line. And over the Christmas break, my son and I, who I taught to program when he was a toddler, we decided we'd do something fun and wrote actually a blockchain client from scratch in Python, and that was our Christmas time project, sitting when we went on vacation up in Maine by a fireplace on the coast. But anyway, so I just, it's really great that you're interacting with Congress. It's important because the things are moving so fast in this field that you have to make sure that Congress actually, understands the implications of the technology and has realistic understandings of what's going to be accomplish, and that frankly the blockchain industry has realistic political expectations of what will be acceptable to the public, because there's a little bit of a disconnect right now, and it's important to bring this together. So thank you all, and now I too have to run.
Folks out at the door, please feel free to come in. We have a lot of seats here in the middle. You don't have to stand the whole hour and a half, I promise you. All right, thank you so much, Congressman. I would now like to welcome to the stage Representative Darren Soto. Would you like to come up and speak into the mic?
It's always great for a lawyer to follow a PhD scientist on such thrilling things as innovation, consumer protection, and blockchain. But you could see in this area we need all sorts of different minds, from those who understand the technology to the nitty-gritty to those who have the experience in the courtroom, and how to make sure that we can craft the proper legislation and make sure we can foster innovation in this area. My name is Darren Soto. I represent the Central Florida area in my second term here in Congress, and get to serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which deals with a lot of the technology portfolio and pretty much every Fortune 500 company in America. So it's a great place to be to help work on these issues. I want to thank the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation for hosting this event and putting together an exciting paper on a Policymakers Guide to Blockchain. We are using it in our office. Bill Rockwood is on our ledge team, and he's been helping us with that. I'm honored to be the co-chair of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, and we are helping host a lot of these events. But when I think about why we're here, when I think about why this is important, first, I think about the internet and how fundamental it was to change the daily lives of humanity. And then I think about fake news, and I think about spoofing, and I think about these Facebook posts that are totally inaccurate, and how misinformation could get on to Twitter and other areas. And there's a big distrust in the internet. And that's where blockchain is going to be so critical. This is the future of ensuring the integrity and the public trust in transactions, in trading of information. And that's why this crusade is so important, because we have to ensure public confidence and business confidence in utilizing what is going to be a growing part of business and is already, which is the internet. I'm honored to help work along with Congressman Davidson in putting forth 2 bills to deal with one part of blockchain, which is the cryptocurrency market. Last term, when I was first finding my way in Congress, one of the big moments was when we had Mark Zuckerberg come in to testify before Energy and Commerce and then before the Commerce Committee in the Senate. And I don't know about you, but I was a little embarrassed by how ignorant it seemed so many in Congress were with regard to basic technologies and applications that we use, probably everybody in this room, every day. And I got home and my wife, who's a few years younger than me, and a little savvier on the apps than I am, I'm pretty savvy, but said, wow, Congress really doesn't know blank about technology. She didn't use the word blank, but we're in the United States Congress, so we got to keep it aboard here. You should really go into this field because there's not a lot of folks who are working in this space, and you're seeing some of the ones. Dr. Foster, Congressman Emmer, Schweiker, you'll see Warren Davidson, and a few others, Josh Gottheimer, really the same names over and over in a lot of this technology. And so I was honored to get in this space with Energy and Commerce, and we put forth noticing that there's no laws on cryptocurrency, yet this is a booming, growing market. Light touch regulation that essentially just does 2 things. One, establishes jurisdiction between the agencies, because there's been a lot of mission creep with the SEC over what is a security versus what is a commodity and a future versus what is a currency. And then we establish definitions under the broader term of digital asset to define all 3 of these in 2 separate bills. And that's critical because we have cryptocurrency startups spending half their money on legal. I have a brother working at Gunderson in Silicon Valley, bringing companies public and working on venture capital work. And West Coast Soto tells me that is a recipe for failure for any startup if you have to spend half your time and half your money on legal. So we need to establish more certainty in the cryptocurrency market without going overboard with regulations that are going to stifle innovation. So establish jurisdictions, narrowly defining securities for what they really are. And most of these are commodities, currencies, or futures. And then establishing SEC, FTC, and CFTC jurisdiction. We'll also have a separate bill dealing with de minimis transactions to develop sort of a safe haven for these small transactions with regard to the IRS. From there, over the next couple of years, we'll look at other consumer protections. But the key is to bless the market, because when we look at the U.S. dollar and how it is the dominant currency of the economy and what that means for being the greatest, most powerful democracy in the world, and what it means in this fight for internet freedom across the globe. We see in places like China and Russia where they're censoring people and blocking certain access to the internet, raiding their citizens. How frighteningly big brother would that be if our nation raided our citizens and how good they are? But this is the fight. And so part of this is making sure that we continue to be a dominant force with innovation and in the internet. And we can't take for granted that the dollar will always be the fundamental currency of the worldwide economy. And I believe one day you'll see cryptocurrency be one of those dominant forms, if not the dominant form of international transactions. So how important is it that we in the United States are the greatest innovator and greatest chosen jurisdiction for new cryptocurrency firms to come through and to help with. So we want to get in there early, and I believe with already having a lot of the innovators in this space who are in the United States and who want to stay, that this legislation, among other things we're doing, will help out with having basic rules of the road. When I look to the future of how government can promote blockchain, there's kind of a careful balance. We already passed amendments to encourage, through the National Defense Authorization Act, for the military to develop new ways to utilize blockchain in the last NDAA bill. and we're encouraging the development of national blockchain strategies and coordinated efforts within other areas of the federal government. Anything big, anything with more data than we could possibly realize, anything where we need absolute integrity and sharing from many parties within an agency is where we see blockchain as having great potential. And we also are working on creating pilot programs and grant opportunities within government agencies for innovators across the nation. But it's also a careful balance because we need to make sure we're not over-regulating in this space, because we do want to encourage innovation. It's the same thing that helped these internet giants coming out of Silicon Valley and other areas that represent some of the largest companies now in the country and in the world. There's a time when you're in your nascent phase of technology where government needs to foster and sort of stay out of the way as best we can, and then you get to a point where there's a maturity, and we're grappling with issues like privacy and people's ownership of their data now with social media, and responsibilities with regard to making sure that fake false news doesn't proliferate across the internet as best we can, and making sure if there are ads on social media that they're not from foreign agents, which is illegal. They're not supposed to be helping out in these things. So one day soon, over the next 5, 10, 20 years, we'll see blockchain in that mature phase where we'll have to, as we see different issues come up, put in more regulations. But for right now, it's about blessing the market and coming up with new ways to utilize this technology. But the ways I think we'll see it in the economy: supply chain management, digital identity, healthcare records. We saw Dr. Foster go quite a bit into that. Data storage and cybersecurity, and financial transactions such as asset tokenization and smart contracts, as was also discussed by Dr. Foster. So we're here to be partners to help you establish integrity, proper definitions, and jurisdiction for a lot of these growing fields, so that there's some more legal certainty for startups, and that we are the chosen and favorite destination of cryptocurrency and blockchain and general technologies. And then as you grow, we will work together to make sure that we're balancing between what you have up here, which is innovation and consumer protection. But we're still in the phase where we have to promote that innovation, and as we get to the phases of a more mature market, we'll work together on the consumer protection phase. With that, though, I just want to thank everybody for having me, and I'm happy to take a few questions while I'm here.
So we'll have one question. Does anyone have a question?
I'll take two, and then I got to get back to committee.
Start here.
Thank you, Congressman. You said that you could see one day where cryptocurrency would be the dominant,
One of the dominant.
one of the dominant transactions for international trade. What do you think about the adoption of cryptocurrency in terms of transactions within the nation? And I've heard statistics about 30% of college students own cryptocurrency. Most of them are holding them. If we get to a point where cryptocurrency becomes somewhat of a norm, all of the financial institutions, the government regulations, the government uses financial institutions to influence, monitor, and control. What happens to our systems, our oversight systems, if we become heavily using cryptocurrencies?
So first, for this phase of innovation, we'd let the free market sort of take care of itself, with the exception of establishing the jurisdiction and definitions that I talked about. But who knows? There could be U.S. currency as cryptocurrency one day. I don't think that that's quite out of the question. But for right now, we're not quite there yet. We just want to make sure startups choose this as the favorite destination for them to grow. And that's my biggest concerns right now. But I don't fear technology. We embrace it, and we have to get ahead of it, because there will be more jobs produced by technology, but there will also be disruption and jobs lost. And the biggest thing that we all have a responsibility to do is make sure those industries and people who are disrupted have a place in the new economy. And that's something that we all should have a responsibility for, because these are our fellow Americans. But that's not an excuse to stifle technology. It's just I believe we have a social responsibility to help those who are disrupted so that they can take care of their families one day. And some of these institutions may be quite different as we look to 10, 20, 30 years down the line.
I'm Mike Nelson, and I've been working on internet policy for 30 years.
For 30 years? Did we even have the internet for 30 years?
I set up the first Senate hearing about the internet in
Okay.
1988. But the fact is that the most important thing we did was Section 230. It enabled the internet because we allowed the people who were building the substrate of the internet not to be liable for everything that somebody would do with that technology. Is there a need for something like this for the fundamental parts of the blockchain? We discussed this last week in Toronto at a conference, and there is a sense that only the big companies are going to get in if you can't have open source, nonprofit applications, because the lawyers are going to take all the money.
So right now we haven't gone that deep into, we're just trying to pass basic definitions and jurisdiction for right now. But we look forward to working with the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation for suggestions on that, because I could see, two unrelated customers using a platform for cryptocurrency may unfortunately have dubious intent in a transaction, and is it really the platform's fault? There's an argument on the first shot, or the second time, maybe not, but if it's a continuing pattern, then there could be. But the beauty of blockchain is that those transactions are fixed in time, so only the most foolish of criminals would use cryptocurrency and blockchain, because they now have a permanent record of their crime that we could go back to. So there is some checks and balances to it already, and the natural integrity and immovability of blockchain. So, but those are things I look forward to working with. The careful balance is not to overregulate right now, but to just provide some certainty to a market that is already existing but doesn't have a lot of the rules of the road. And basically agencies are making those rules without lawmakers who are duly elected, and agencies tend to have administrative creep, jurisdiction creep, compete against each other, and then you suddenly have overlap of 2-3 jurisdictions, and a lawyer's trying to tell some startup that you need to comply with all 3, and now you have half your startup costs going to legal. So these are things we will work on together. But thank you, everybody, for having me.
Great. Thanks again to the co-chairs of the Blockchain Caucus for coming out and sharing your thoughts with us today. So let's get started with our panel. I'm going to preview our report a little bit. Much of my focus at ITIF has been on understanding how emerging technologies impact or are impacted by policy. Blockchain technologies and cryptocurrencies serve as a very useful case study in regulatory impacts. We have this brand new technology that has significantly changed a lot of business models across a variety of sectors, including in highly regulated sectors like the financial services industry. And policymakers could not have possibly fathomed this technology coming, and therefore a lot of the rules that are already on our books impact certain implementations of the technology. To that end, today ITIF is releasing a brand new report on blockchain technology for policymakers. It's available outside and again online at our website, itif.org. The report takes a critical look at the technology. It does it through the lens of policy, and the goal is to show what are the strengths of this technology, where has it yet to show merit, and where could it be going in the future. We focus a lot on the policy implications of it, and we offer policymakers 10 different takeaways so that they can help encourage blockchain innovation, as well as some other values such as consumer protection. I think the point of our paper is to say, and this is just generally, that we want policymakers to understand and focus on this technology, but we don't want them to overregulate it. We want the government to be adopting the technology, but we don't want a blockchain to nowhere, if that makes sense. So we have a fantastic set of panelists here today. We're going to talk about the report a little bit, but we're going to mostly focus on what they each bring to the table. So starting from my right, we have Victoria Adams, who is the public sector lead from Consensus. We have Tejas Bhatt, the interim vice president of food safety and health from Walmart. Alan Cohn, the counsel for the Blockchain Alliance. And finally, Daniel Gorfine, who's the Chief Innovation Officer and Director of Lab CFTC at the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Thank you all for joining us today. So I want to start with the current state of the technology and some of its many applications. Maybe we can discuss what kind of progress we have seen over the last few years and how regulators are starting to approach the various applications of this technology. Alan, I'm going to go to you first. Sorry for the confusion. Several people named Alan in the room. So people often think of blockchain as a financial services product, right, because of Bitcoin, the technology that spawned it. But the financial services sector has changed dramatically with innovation from this type of technology. And we've seen cryptocurrencies that have spread well beyond the initial application. Can you describe some of the changes in the financial services sector, highlight any of the most impactful case studies?
There we go. Yes. So thank you, and thanks, Alan, and thank you to ITIF for inviting us to talk about this subject. I think that's a really interesting piece of the story about blockchain and cryptocurrency. As you know, this technology was kind of pulled together a couple of different pieces into an underlying technology that supported Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency. And that's got three pieces, right? It's got a peer-to-peer transaction element without an intermediary. It's got a decentralized distributed ledger, and it's got a decentralized consensus mechanism for validating transactions. What that does, of course, is it opens the door for a host and number of different applications. And financial services is one of those places where we're seeing a lot of that activity. So one of the places we're seeing a lot of impact, for example, is in cross-border remittances, where people may be forced to incur fees of 8, 15, 30% of transaction fees as funds move from a departing country to an arriving country for a variety of reasons. Cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology provide the basis for reducing those fees down into the single digits, into the low single digits. Another place that we've seen a lot, we'll talk, I would imagine, due to my co-panelists about supply chain management, but the corresponding element of trade finance. So this is an area where letters of credit are issued for shipments in motion. This is a heavily paper-based activity and has been for decades. It's resisted all efforts to digitize. Blockchain technology may finally provide the technological foundation to be able to digitize the letter of credit and trade finance process, both speeding transactions but also freeing up working capital, pulling it out of the finance system and allowing companies to put it to work. The third place is cross-border movement of funds, financial institution to financial institution. If I want to send an email to someone in another country, I can do that in seconds. If I want to send money to someone in another country through a bank, the bank wants to do that. It take 2 weeks, and that transaction goes dark for several days. You might not be able to know exactly where the money is at any given place. So blockchain technology actually provides a backbone technology for financial institutions to be able to conduct those types of transactions. There's a lot of other applications. There's a lot of technical reasons why those things are possible, a lot of challenges, but those are some of the ways in which blockchain technology is really impacting the financial services industry beyond just cryptocurrency.
Great, thank you. Tori, I'm going to go to you. Consensus is a leading provider of blockchain as a service for businesses and in both in the private sector as well as the public sector. I was wondering if you could highlight a very exciting high-impact case for blockchain in the public sector.
Sure. So I'll answer that by saying there are three potential things that we see. One, identity. Identity without government backing is just not going to work. The more we see that coming in, the more we can do it. Consensus has the largest single identity platform in the world in Uport, and yet without more government support, without embracing of that, we're not going to see that. And identity is key to every single blockchain application. Medical records, we heard Congressman Schweiker talk about, it's vital. I do a lot of work in the opioid epidemic, and without medical records that are going to be undergirded by some government support, we're not going to get very far. I'd say trade finance, as Alan was just saying, I think the average trade finance document has like 40 touch points that needs sign off from. 90% of that paperwork adds absolutely no value at all. We need government to step in, provide the regulatory sandboxes that will allow us to begin to experiment. The Europeans are doing it. We're starting to see some interest from USDA, we're starting to see some interest from Commerce. Those are the kind of things that government can have a real strong impact on if they get in there and allow us to be able to exploit that. And finally, supply chain. Supply chain, supply chain, supply chain, or really supply net. Nowadays, there isn't a single chain. It's a large network, a cloud of every single supplier you can think of. A current modern aircraft has over 3 million parts. That's 3 million primary parts. Think of the parts that go into the parts. Think of the broader network that's out there. Think of how they're built on relationships, how they're built on digital exchanges. There's huge amounts of things there. When you think of DoD trying to track their supply network to begin to understand how much of that has perhaps less than benign actors coming into the supply network, we need that tracking. That is an incredibly important thing going forward. And as we move to additive manufacturing, it's going to become even more important. Right now, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, he has a vision where every single Marine will have a 3D printer in their workspace. Those 3D printers are going to be printing just-in-time components for something. If you're out on a fire base in Afghanistan and something breaks down and you can't get it, you're going to print it. And you better be able to ensure that the digital designs that go forward into that 3D printer are actually correct. They're not spoofed. They're not some bad actor coming in there, putting in a part that's going to cause a machine to break down that is going to cost American service people's lives. That is a critical thing. Blockchain is the underlying technology that will enable us to fight a 20th century war. And there's no way around that, because as we move to that manufacturing, to that additive manufacturing, keeping control of the digital designs are going to be vital. The Chinese are doing it now. NATO is starting to do it now. We will be left behind unless the government comes in and acts that, and that's a really important thing.
We're going to take apart a little bit of that statement and talk about it in a little more depth in a bit, but I wanted to highlight that supply chain example. Tejas, you and Walmart has been on the front lines of adopting this technology in your supply chain, especially around around food safety. I was wondering if you could describe the project, what you've been working on, some of the improvements you've seen, and the lessons you've learned.
Sure, Alan. First of all, thank you for the invitation thank you also to ITIF for the invitation. I'm glad to be here to talk about Walmart's experience in this space. Tori actually said it best. For us, blockchain is an enabling technology. It's not about blockchain for us. That's not the goal, right? We didn't start with the question, what can blockchain do for us? Because I think that's the wrong question to start with. We intentionally spent 2 years testing, learning, scaling blockchain technology with the intent to solve a business problem for us. And from my side, it was for food safety. We wanted to identify and mitigate food safety risks throughout the supply web, as we like to call it. It's not a chain. And essentially protect our customers from bad food. That was the end goal, right? And it led to the obvious question, do we really know what our supply web looks like? And yeah, we know our direct suppliers, but beyond that, we don't have a lot of visibility into it, and that's why we embarked on this journey. I'm really happy to say that we're one of the few groups that have implemented blockchain in a production environment. It's not a proof of concept. It's not a pilot. It's something that is connected with our day-to-day business operations. It's connected with our systems, and we're sending data on a day-to-day basis to the blockchain, right? So what is exciting about this is some of the things we've learned from the 2 years, and even after we went into production. The first is, being a computer scientist myself, I get this question a lot. Garbage in, garbage out, right? If you put bad data into the blockchain, aren't you using bad data throughout the blockchain? And I would say yes. This is not unique to blockchain. This is true for any system, any database that handles data. So bad data is a bad thing, and we are doing some things to mitigate bad data going on the blockchain. But without anything, we're seeing a change in behavior from our supply base. Because the blockchain is immutable, and because we can track back who put that bad data in the first place, we're seeing better quality data being put on the blockchain. A good example, a good analogy I like to use is doing a crossword puzzle with a pen versus a pencil, right? If it's with a pen, you're going to be very careful about what you put on there. That's what's happening with our blockchain work. Everyone is being very careful about the accuracy of the data that's being put on the blockchain. So it's improving our confidence in that data. The second big benefit we've seen so far is that it would have been so much easier for Walmart to have designed a Walmart proprietary system that works for Walmart. We didn't do that. We intentionally invited our competitors to build something that works for the ecosystem and gives value back to the ecosystem. So while we are getting visibility back to the farm where the spinach was grown, in exchange for that, we're giving visibility to how that spinach is flowing from our distribution centers to our stores and eventually to our customers. So it's a win-win for everyone in this ecosystem, and it's not something that we're using as a competitive advantage because it's a food safety-driven initiative for us.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to start segueing over into the regulatory and the enforcement side. I'm going to start with you.
Everyone's going to zone
Daniel.
out now.
No, this is the most important part, y'all. All right, so we increasingly see regulators on the front lines of looking at some of these new technologies. And we're lucky enough to have the person who is a thought leader in this exact space. So how does the CFTC approach a new technology? Can you describe what you do at Lab CFTC and how do you look at new financial products and services?
Sure. Thanks, Alan. And I got to actually go back to what you were saying in your opening remarks where you said, policymakers couldn't possibly fathom where technology is going to go, and I'm going to prove your point. When I joined the CFTC 2 years ago and I was scoping, what areas of financial technology and innovation are going to hit the agency, I was aware that back in 2015, the agency had determined that, certain virtual currencies like Bitcoin are commodities. And I thought, that's pretty interesting. I really wonder if people are going to be focused on that subject. By the end of 2017, we had Bitcoin futures, and I think just seeing everybody in the room today answers the question. But more broadly, so how does the CFTC engage with emerging technology? So Lab CFTC is our FinTech and Innovation Engagement Initiative. The underpinning, I think, of any good policy making is around understanding, and understanding comes from engagement. You've got to get out there, you've got to get your hands on technology, you've got to talk to experts in this space, you've got to be available to innovators, you've got to have an open door so that you understand what's actually happening in the marketplace. And that really is the predicate of Lab CFTC. So broadly speaking, over the last few years, we've met with literally hundreds of innovators. And when I say innovators, that could be an established financial institution, a startup, a tech company, anybody who's using technology to do innovative things in our markets, we're willing to sit down and talk to them. The value proposition is really twofold. Some people are coming in because they want to say hello and introduce what they're working on. Others might come in and say, gosh, we're trying to navigate the alphabet soup of Washington, the regulatory landscape, understand where the CFTC begins and ends, where does the SEC come into play. Those are the types of questions we get. Others may come in and point out questions or ambiguity or friction in rules, and we're willing to entertain those types of questions as well. Obviously, for us as an agency, the value proposition is we do see what's coming around the corner, and that can help to inform policy and, again, build that internal understanding. There's also an element beyond policy where we start thinking, how can certain promising technologies actually benefit the agency itself, make us more effective and efficient? That's something that we call CFTC 2.0, which is really the idea of incorporating technology for our own use. More specifically to the crypto and blockchain space, I'm going to unpack that a little bit because we're obviously talking about a pretty broad spectrum of activity. When you're dealing with crypto assets, you're dealing with a financial instrument. So that's going to be different in terms of how we're thinking about it. As I mentioned at the outset, the CFTC found in 2015 that Bitcoin's a commodity. And just to step back and explain that, the Commodity Exchange Act, which is our statute, has an incredibly broad definition of commodity. Many things are commodities, and we don't necessarily take a regulatory interest in all commodities. To the extent folks start building futures and derivatives products, that's when our interest will increase. We regulate exchanges that offer futures and derivatives products. We regulate those specific products. And we do have kind of a backward-looking enforcement jurisdiction over fraud and manipulation in the underlying markets, the cash markets or spot markets for commodities. So when you talk about crypto, that's the realm that we're active. On the other side of the spectrum, you're hearing here discussion of certain permissioned blockchain or DLT efforts. And we think about that a little bit differently. We recognize that these are technologies. These are not necessarily financial products, so we don't regulate technology. What's interesting and what's intriguing is the potential for permissioned blockchain systems to drive certain efficiencies in terms of the back office and operations and plumbing and infrastructure of capital markets. That's interesting to us. And then more specifically, we can probably talk about this more in a little bit, but it's the idea that regulatory reporting, certain reg tech components and compliance could be made more efficient, potentially through these types of DLT networks. So we look at the full range. We're interested in understanding the full range because, again, that's the predicate for good policymaking and for good technology and procurement strategy.
So, Alan, we just heard about the CFTC, but what are some of the other regulatory challenges and regulatory actions that we're seeing in the cryptocurrency market, or we have seen over the last couple of years?
So I think what we've seen over the last couple of years is a progressive cycle of different regulatory agencies encountering cryptocurrency and crypto assets and trying to figure out what to do. And we've seen different agencies take different approaches. And I think you've heard of the CFTC approach. Basically, in a sense, there was a cascade. 2013, the director of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which administers the Bank Secrecy Act, our anti-money laundering statute, in testimony before Congress said, well, look, cryptocurrency, as its advocates propound, is currency. We have rules on how you handle currency. Follow those rules. And so that began kind of a regulatory floor in the United States around handling cryptocurrency and around the entities that handle it, cryptocurrency exchanges and other types of providers. 2014, the Internal Revenue Service came forward and said, well, from our perspective, cryptocurrency is property. And so we have rules on how you tax property, follow those rules. 2015, you heard the CFTC in enforcement actions asserted that cryptocurrency was a commodity and covered by the Commodity Exchange Act. That took until about 2017 for the Securities and Exchange Commission to really start to get its arms around the technology. And in a report on the Decentralized Autonomous Organization hack, the DAO hack, asserted and made statements that were reflective of other public statements that they saw certain types of crypto assets as securities. Now, a lot has been made about, oh my gosh, how can you have an asset that's characterized in all these different ways? Less important than that, that's interesting and something that lawyers find endlessly fascinating. What's more important for innovators and for companies in the space is really what does that mean are the rules that apply to me? Number one, and I think from a regulator perspective, to what degree do I understand the technology and how it both interacts with my regulatory responsibilities and how it fits within the industries that I regulate? And that's where we've seen differences and tensions. The Blockchain Alliance is an organization that was stood up on behalf of Coin Center and the Chamber of Digital Commerce. It's administered by Steptoe & Johnson, a law firm here. To help bridge the gap between industry and law enforcement agencies and regulators, trying to provide a forum for those entities to engage with each other, as Dan said, to really start building that understanding through engagement. And we hope that we've been helpful in that process, as a lot of other efforts are. What we think is most important, though, to see here is for government agencies really to begin to take a more proactive stance in doing a couple things. Number one, issuing guidance. Really telling the industry, this is what we think. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, and it doesn't have to cover everything. It can iterate. Second is it can't be of the government regulation type that says stop until we figure this all out, because all types of technology simply moves too fast for that. And third, it should really lead from engagement rather than enforcement. There's a place for enforcement, obviously. The CFTC is a great example of this, where initially actions came out of enforcement, but the agency has really, the Commission has really turned to using engagement tools between innovative efforts like Lab CFTC, as well as rulemakings and other things, to really engage with industry and find the right model. And ultimately, what I think that we would ideally like to see more of, people forget FinCEN, as I started with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. What's interesting about their regulatory regime is, instead of saying you need to get a license from us or we need to approve what you're doing, the Bank Secrecy Act simply requires that financial institutions, of which money services businesses, of which a lot of cryptocurrency exchanges fall under, simply need to register with FinCEN. They need to have a compliance officer, a compliance program, and they need to file suspicious activity reports. FinCEN's been getting those suspicious activity reports, working with those compliance officers, conducting audits for 5 years now. And it's given that agency a lot of insight into the industry. Efforts of that type, where there's guidance paired with engagement, and of course paired with enforcement actions as necessary, really serves both industry by giving it certainty, as well as the regulatory agencies by giving them that insight that leads to understanding and that foundation for engagement.
I'd like to pick up off that and dovetail off that. And how can we encourage regulators to better understand these technologies? What flexible methods do we have to work for them to go out and on this engagement? Tejas, how has Walmart worked with its regulators in the food net world?
Yeah, no, absolutely, great question. So, as we were embarking on this journey, we recognized fairly early on that there needs to be an interface within this ecosystem for regulators. And when we're talking about traceability in the food system, as we are investigating outbreaks, as we're executing recalls, FDA needs to be able to get access to some of the data that's on the blockchain so they can conduct their investigations faster and thereby protecting public health. We have not figured out the governance system around this, right? So one of the things that we as in the private sector is worried about is this big brother watching on all the data at all times, and that's not going to work in the long term, right, at scale. So at the right time, for the right reasons, how do we enable visibility for the regulator to get access to data they need to conduct more efficient outbreak investigations or recalls? On the other side of things, we talked a little bit about the trade piece of it. Walmart conducted a pilot with the Customs and Border Protection Agency to demonstrate interoperability between a blockchain platform they were evaluating as a proof of concept or a proof of value with the blockchain that we were doing. So to me, that tells me two things. One is that there is a role for regulatory agencies and government agencies to start experimenting with blockchain technology for their own purposes, right? How do they streamline their own processes to make it work better, whether that's interagency coordination or public-private coordination? And the second piece of it is, I think it's important for the private sector to partner with and learn from how and educate what we're seeing on our side, so that we don't create roadblocks or barriers to innovation. And I think, Alan, you mentioned that in your opening remarks as well. And I think it's in the report as well. We can't put in too many guardrails too soon because we don't know where this technology is going to go. We don't know how this is going to evolve in the long term. And the more partnership-driven approaches we can take, the better it would be for this ecosystem.
Tori, you work directly in this space with a lot of different agencies adopting the technology now. What are some of the best practices that you've seen for this kind of engagement and procurement of the technology by federal agencies?
Well, the first thing you should do is buy consensus products. No, but if you can't do that, and apologies, I know you had to take second best, but no, the key thing we see throughout is start small, get your hands dirty, figure out what's going on, Start up those small pilots, the things which have obvious business value. The US Treasury's example in their FIT program, where they looked at asset tracking, looking at physical assets when it came to phones. Very simple thing. You give out a cell phone, you don't quite know who's got the cell phone. Maybe some bigwigs lose their cell phone and then swear blind they weren't given it, right? You can go back and say you've got it. They estimate they save 0.25 of an FTE. When you start to extend that through federal agencies, that's a significant saving in terms of taking that body and allowing that person to do another thing. So starting small, starting on something that can show benefits, and then beginning to expand that out, and starting to move on from there to more and more aggressive and expansive things. So we're seeing Treasury now go from that to be interested in software licenses, to be interested in looking at financial payments, to being looking at grants. We've seen FDA starting out by looking at the communication of information during public health emergencies. In that case, a lot of information going back and forth, bouncing off different parties. You need to know who had it and when they had it. You've seen it in DoD and the various services where they're beginning to look at it within that supply web that we talked about. Where is the information going? Who's got what, and going on from there. Another critical element we're starting to see is that this technology is not something on its own. It is part of a much broader suite of fourth revolution, industrial revolution technologies coming in. Most critically, as my colleague would say here, with artificial intelligence. As we're starting to develop autonomous agents, bots, and artificially intelligent systems within an organization, those things have identity. They're actually logged into the personnel records, beginning to maintain a track of how they are within the system, how they behave, and what decisions were taken. If I have an autonomous drone or a truck that is moving from 2 fire bases in Afghanistan, I want to know who made the decisions. How did it make its decisions? I want to see those things time-stamped as I go through, being able to track. Starting then to think about those advanced use cases in terms of what comes next, rather than focusing now. We tend to see 3 types of people when we come into a federal agency in terms of what they're interested in. Person 1 could be characterized by the question, blockchain, oh, that's Bitcoin, right? You can buy drugs with that, I've heard. You know, I used to have this T-shirt that said, blockchain, it's not just for drugs, sex trafficking, and weapons anymore. A friend of mine in the FBI says, anymore, not just. You know, when you get that kind of person, that's education. That's education, education, education. You know, we have a ton of educational products that we provide, and we find that providing them for government is a really important thing. You got to get people up to speed. The second level of person you see is an enthusiast, right? We've all been to the conferences. You see this guy, he wants to put dogs on the blockchain. He's just, everything has to go on the blockchain. Actually, I said dogs on the blockchain, and somebody said, yeah, it's a really good idea. And it turned out this guy had all kinds of dog ideas. But when you've got that point, right, that person's an enthusiast. Typically, it ends up by saying, though, they want to take their process, which can be completely normally implemented by existing technologies, and put that on the blockchain, right? I've got a 3-step process that involves the exchange of pens, and I want to put my pens. Are your pens a high-value asset? No. Is it a digital asset? No. Do you have a problem with it? No, not really, but I could do it, right? That's a bad thing. That's when normally we step in and say, hey, let's do a design session. Let's think this through. If you want to get your feet wet, let's find a use case that makes sense. Let's look at something that's easy to implement when it's coming in. The third level thinker we see is somebody that's up there with the tokenizing everything, and they've got it, and, you know, and all of this, and it's like, slow down, man, you know, because the rest of the world isn't there yet. You've got to be able to convince the folks around you. You've got to be able to say the business benefits. As you were saying, you start out with the problem and say, how can I solve my problem? If blockchain comes out along the way, great. If it doesn't, you know, one of my colleagues is always arguing against supply chain, because he's saying, you know, is it really that difficult to do it? And I say, yeah, in a modern supply system, it's really difficult to track things down. You know, we've gone out and suggested some really radical things sometimes when we talk to those guys. Like, we came and somebody said, We have a problem with contraband coming in on our supply line. How can we reduce this? And we said, well, you need to increase the incentives of the different parties. Why don't you have people have a crypto bond that they have to buy every stage of the process, and then if contraband is found, they lose the bond? Great idea. Absolutely no one will touch it. It's too far ahead. So you got to sort of work that person back to say, let's start out with the use case, the practical thing that real business benefits can be shown from, and let's go from there. And that's what we're seeing working, and that's where we think it'll go.
Thank you so much.
Add one thing to
Yeah, of course.
So I agree with everything Tori said. I just wanted to go back briefly to the question around, for regulators, is this an evolution in thinking or is it a revolution in thinking, right? And if you look at, because I'm in food safety, look at the Food Safety Modernization Act that was passed in 2011. This is 2019, and it hasn't been modernized yet, right? And technologies have come along the way. Section 204 of the Food Safety Modernization Act asks FDA to release updated requirements for traceability in the food system. That is not out yet, right? So this is an opportunity for FDA to rethink its concept around one step forward, one step back traceability, which was implemented or codified by the Bioterrorism Act of 2002. And really think about if someone like Walmart can trace back its mangoes in 2.2 seconds for which farm it came from, this outdated mode of 24 hours for every step back in the supply chain doesn't work, right? And how do we change that from a regulatory standpoint to modernize it in a way to meet it to where the industry is without stifling innovation, right? So it's almost a performance standard. It's not about blockchain again. It's about, we expect you to be able to trace it back in 2.2 seconds. If you have a different way of doing it, go for it. That's great, right? But we cannot take days, weeks, months to identify the source of an outbreak. The two large romaine outbreaks that happened last year where FDA and CDC said, don't consume romaine nationwide. That's devastating, not just from a public health standpoint, because hundreds of people are falling sick, but also from an economic standpoint, and it's just not a sustainable way to move forward on this.
Can I jump in? Well, let's just jump in real quick. So, we see this too, just going back to what you're saying. When we're looking at opioids, right, and prescription drug tracking, if I've got a prescription, I can go to another state. If I can go to another state, I can get it filled twice if I've got a paper prescription. Now, we're moving now to where we're starting to see states move on to doing that digitally. Problem is, they're uploading their data 24 hours after they've done it. They're uploading their data at the end of the week. They're using different standards for uploading their data. This is the kind of thing that if we can get a single system here, a single system for managing how opioids are being prescribed, we can cut down on that abuse, and we can also cut down the liability that folks like Walmart are starting to incur from this. This isn't a blockchain use case. This is a good business use case that we need to start implementing.
And it's also,
go ahead.
Yeah, and it's also a good government use case. And so this is really I think one of the key opportunities for Congress is that there's a lot of these types of requirements, goals, aspirational visions that are sitting in enacted legislation right now. For example, the FDA and pharmaceutical track and trace, under an obligation to figure out a better system for tracking and tracing pharmaceutical lots by 2023. As was noted, it's 2019. So this is an opportunity to look at pilots, to look at sandboxes. Regulatory sandboxes don't have to solely be financial regulatory sandboxes. They can be any type of place where there's a regulatory structure in place, where some type of loosening of the regulatory boundaries in exchange for greater visibility of an agency into an innovation process may make sense for both parties. Taz noted Customs and Border Protection. Customs and Border Protection administers a variety of regulatory structures, from its piece in the Single Window Initiative to all sorts of responsibilities for whether it's assessing customs duties to point of origin and provenance, and these are all from existing regulatory structures. And again, Customs and Border Protection has been very forward-leaning in looking at pilots, not just with Walmart, but with others, looking at some of those issues. This is another place for Congress to say, how can we help? How can we enable things through appropriations language, through report language, through working with the agencies to enable innovation both in the technology and operations, but also in the regulatory structure?
I want to follow up on the Congress question, but while we're on the regulatory note, I just want to go to Daniel, because we have him here in the room. What are the lessons that you've learned while you're looking at new technologies? What are the best practices that the CFTC conducts?
Well, yeah, so a lot has been said, and I want to just step back and kind of respond to some of what folks are talking about. And again, I'm speaking for myself. I should be very clear, not speaking for the agency. But I do think that there's a lot of receptivity from policymakers, regulators, to understand where ambiguity or friction in rules causes tension or could be impeding development. So, my recommendation, and certainly when folks come in to talk to us, we do recommend get specific with some of the challenges that you're facing. There's a lot of kind of high-level talk, well, we need government to be more open to blockchain. Okay, what do you mean? And we're talking about an incredibly broad range of activity right now. We're talking about kind of financial services and products all the way to, food safety and pharma. And so again, my 2 cents here and my advice is get specific about requirements or issue areas, and I think that you'll find, receptivity to engage in those kinds of discussions. I'm going to flip over to, I think, where you're going with best practices, and one thing, and pick up on some comments about guidance. I think Alan's point is very well said and well taken. There's a flip side to this, though, and this is the balance I think regulators try to strike with things like guidance and rulemakings, and it's always a little bit of careful what you wish for, because on the one hand, you'll have folks saying, we need absolute clarity. I want really, really precise rules. Well, when that happens, people will tend to say, now you've boxed in innovation, you've been incredibly prescriptive, and how in the world are new models going to develop? So you got to be careful not to get too prescriptive too soon. On the other hand, understood that there may be some ambiguity in application of rules. Why? Because rules don't always contemplate where the market's moving. So it is about striking the right balance as regulators get to better understand a space, and as you start to see where a space is going and what harms you're trying to solve for, that's usually the place where clear guidance becomes more appropriate. And so hopefully that's what you're seeing is incremental guidance provided. From a CFTC perspective, the way this has come up for us is that, in the early days, we were getting a lot of folks coming in through Lab CFTC asking these questions about CFTC jurisdiction. And I've got a token concept, I've got a cryptocurrency, and that's why we've published these Lab CFTC primers over the last couple of years. So we published our first one, I guess a little over a year ago. That was on the topic of virtual currencies, and we have a kind of a formula for these primers where the first portion of it is to explain what is the technology, what are its potential use cases and applications. Part 2 is why does it matter to the CFTC? How could this impact our markets, or where would our jurisdiction apply? And then the third portion is to consider what are some of the risks and challenges involved with these technologies. So doing that was in large part a response to very common questions we were getting. So we tried to set out some high-level educational guideposts so folks could understand quickly, here's what the CFTC regulates and how our jurisdiction may be implicated. We did another primer at the end of last year on the topic of smart contracts. Again, that was to try to be a little bit more forward-looking, to say, I think folks in the regulatory community have a pretty good sense of cryptocurrencies today. What are we seeing that's going to be new, or what do we think will have a large impact on markets going forward? Well, the potential for smart contracts. So we did the same kind of exercise there. So that's our way of engaging in this type of kind of feedback or dialogue with the public, and I think it's really important that that actually happens. And I'll leave with one last point. A colleague of mine who used to work at another agency once said on a public panel, so I can parrot him. He said, the worst thing that regulators do is you have people come in, they pose all these new concepts, and then the regulator either says no, or maybe even worse, says nothing at all. And it's that nothing at all that I think people find to be pretty frustrating. So to the extent we can at least get some pen to paper on, here's our current thinking, let's hear back what the reaction is, especially in an emerging area, I think that that's the right approach, and that's been the approach that we've taken.
So I'm going to have a couple minutes for questions, be thinking of them, but we're here in Congress. What is one thing that Congress can do today to help assuage some of the uncertainty around blockchain applications, to improve regulators' authority, or to help with any specific thing? It's open to the panel, so who would like to start?
Money. Right now, the amount of money that Congress is appropriating to spend on blockchain when it comes to the public sector is a rounding error of a rounding error. It is laughable. 100 million is what's said next year. I mean, that's a joke when it comes to the bajillions of dollars the federal government spends. Europe and China and Japan are not standing still. They are investing heavily into this. This is a government-led program. If you want to build up the ability of these nascent industries to deliver, provide funding. Provide funding. Otherwise, it's all going to be in the financial area, and it will never get away from that. But if you start to really utilize the technology, I mean, if you're going to change the world, guys, let's spend it on something decent than on getting, some stupid-ass coin. I mean, when people want to talk about crypto, it's like, oh, wake me up when we're through. Let's start talking about how we can change the world with this, how we can revolutionize identity management, how we can revolutionize the delivery of government services, how we can revolutionize food safety, how we can change the relationship to create this crypto-contractual government in which an individual can interface directly with their government and be able to see their data, as we heard. Let's start investing in that, because nobody's going to build that. This is the classic lighthouse problem, right? We need lighthouses, but there's no such thing as a private sector lighthouse, because how do you collect the money from turning the lamp on? And what the federal government needs to do is to begin to invest, as it invested in the aerospace industry, as it invested in the technology industry, as it invested in the early stages of the internet. We need that help to start getting going on these more expansive applications of this technology.
I would offer a couple things. Number one, it's very promising to see Representatives Davidson and Soto and others focusing on the question of jurisdiction. This is a place where the agencies and commissions cannot resolve these issues necessarily themselves. As a former career senior executive at the Department of Homeland Security, I suffered under the challenge of figuring out jurisdiction both within the executive branch and among congressional committees overseeing different departments. And I think we're seeing some of the same challenges now. That doesn't mean there need to be necessarily bright lines, but some lanes in the road, and also an expression of expectation that agencies work with each other to resolve issues that fall under joint jurisdiction would go a long way. Second is encouraging agencies to begin the process of issuing the guidance and experimenting with the technology. Make congressional intent clear that there's an expectation that agencies be giving guidance and agencies be working with the technology. And when there is already guidance, when there's feedback from industry, that either more is necessary or different is necessary, to be reactive and responsive to that. Dan makes an excellent point that you need to strike the right balance. Obviously, nobody wants too much guidance, but what we've seen where guidance has hit that right balance, we've seen kind of a flourishing of innovation against that guidance because there is some certainty to innovate against. The third thing I think that's really important is again, as you think about what's within a committee jurisdiction or an agency jurisdiction, is to focus on what the policy outcome is trying to be achieved. And people at the table said it. This is not about blockchain per se. This is about how do you ensure investor protection and market integrity, and how does this technology add to those goals. This is about ensuring food safety or traceability or understanding of provenance or safer movement of goods into the country. How does this technology advance that goal? And so whenever thinking about questions of either jurisdiction or guidance, when a sandbox, when a pilot is appropriate, think about what am I ultimately trying to accomplish here What are the characteristics of this technology that can help accomplish that goal? And then now, how can I provide the guidance, provide the top cover, or provide the encouragement for this agency or this group of agencies to either experiment with this technology, issue guidance, or take other appropriate steps?
Would anyone else? Yeah,
Yeah, let me add two things to that. One is, I agree, obviously appropriations. FDA has made a request in their budget to do some work with emerging technologies like blockchains. I hope they get the resources they need to do the pilots they want to do in pharma and in food. CBP is similar to that. They're already trying to engage with the private sector on that, so encourage that, enable that. But the second thing we have not talked a lot about in this room so far is, Representative Stryker talked about a single record for a consumer, but we live in a global economy, and how do we think about this in the frame of being leaders in establishing policy around this, but also harmonizing it, aligning it with our trading partners around the world. So the GDPR issue when it comes to putting consumer records on the blockchain, how do you delete those records at the request of the consumer in the European Union, right? We live in a global economy, so I would be hesitant to look at this only inward, but also look at this outward as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the only thing I would add is, we've kind of engaged frequently with members of Congress, especially our oversight committees, and they're very engaged on these topics. Obviously we as an agency, we're not out there advocating for specific legislation, but we do provide technical assistance when members of Congress come up with interesting ideas that may touch on our jurisdiction and our space. One area that I would flag that we had mentioned that federal financial regulators don't have great latitude to do basic kind of research and testing on emerging technologies. And that was one thing that we scoped out a couple years ago when we started building out Lab CFTC is, do we have the tools to be able to get our hands more onto the technology just to better understand it? And I'm back to the whole thing of understanding drives good policy, it drives better technology and procurement strategy. So there was legislation that was offered last year that would give the CFTC broader research and testing authority in something that's called other transactions authority, which is similar to what you'll see kind of in the sciences space, where science-based agencies can do a little bit more testing of new technologies. So I would just flag that as an area where we were able to provide some technical assistance, and that could help to provide us a little bit more space to get our hands onto tech.
And I would flag that almost every suggestion that they just highlighted is explained in that report. So please read them. I'm going to open it up to questions in the back over here. Please state your name and try and be brief.
Hi. Thank you. Kara Sutton. My question has to do with what you mentioned to us about privacy. This year, Congress is looking at potential privacy regulation, so I'd be interested to hear from your all's perspective, what should they keep in mind in terms of blockchain? And then secondly, looking at liability and what regulators should be thinking about in terms of liability.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to how Walmart is thinking about the consumer piece of this, right? So for us, while our initiative is about traceability back in the supply chain and efficient tracing and tracking of the food, at the end of the day, we think this is going to instill more consumer confidence in the food system, right? So how do we, as Walmart, create a better shopping experience for our customers when they come into our stores or order online? How can we enable them to see some of the data that's on the blockchain to help make them their purchasing decisions that align with their values, right? For some, it's organic. For some, it's non-GMO, whatever that might be, I don't know. But at the same time, we're being very careful about not tracking the customer itself on the blockchain because of the privacy issues, right? It's an immutable ledger. Once it's on there, there isn't an easy way to delete that record at the request of the customer. So we're not using this to track customers today, and I don't envision that happening anytime soon, but there is a customer interface to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that issue of privacy is a really interesting one, obviously, as the European Union's general data protection regulation and similar legislation in California is kind of put forward as a model. And people point to, well, is there a conflict between GDPR and blockchain? Fundamentally, in a sense, GDPR on the one hand and the concept of blockchain or use of distributed ledgers are trying to achieve the same policy goal, right, which is to ensure integrity and control over data. They're doing it in fundamentally different ways. And so the question really becomes, which is the better way to do it? The GDPR route really focuses on, strict regulation on data controllers and questions about how data can be addressed or removed or manipulated by others. The fundamental ethos of blockchain really focuses on things like, as was said, data permanence, individual ownership of data, and preserving an individual's right to control when he or she enters into a consensual exchange of data and what elements and what attributes and what that's for. And concepts like transparency and decentralization as better guarantors of integrity and ultimately of trust. So I think that better than thinking from the privacy side about a conflict between blockchain is trying to accomplish one thing and GDPR is trying to accomplish another, to go back to say, well, they're both trying to accomplish the same thing. There are two different ways of doing it, and which do we believe fits better, into the way that, what do we think is the better way to do this? Preserving more control for the individual over his or her data, trusting in permanence and transparency and decentralization, or do we want to look at a more regulatory-heavy approach focusing on controllers of data? On liability, I would just say, just to throw one thought in on that, this is almost kind of like the regulatory question. We have a whole construct in the United States about how liability is allocated for a variety of different things, most likely especially for the range of enterprise applications of blockchain. This is just a question of how do those principles get applied when blockchain is being used as a technology. Liability for questions about what data to put on to a chain, what data is kept off chain, how is that protected, the nature of agreements that are being entered into, whether conditions are met. Those things all exist in principles of contract law, or tort law, or other types of common law and statutory regimes. So I think the question is more about how does the use of blockchain fit into that, rather than how do we come up with a new way of thinking about liability in a blockchain world.
I think one of the important things to think about with privacy, and what blockchain causes us to think about, is why does privacy bother us? We all start out with this fear of Big Brother. And as it has turned out in the end, it's not Big Brother we have to fear. Government is an afterthought when it comes to our data management. It's actually all our helpful little brothers out there who have turned out to have our data. And therein lies the problem. Because despite our stated preference of wanting privacy, our revealed preference is we are prepared to sell our souls for the right to play Candy Crush. We give away data, and we find that the data that our little brothers in industry and commerce provide for us is awfully handy. I rather like the idea that when I shop at Walmart, they might say, you might also like, or offer me a deal on something that I've already bought. The thing is with our privacy data is we fear the loss of it without really being able to articulate the harm it does, when the benefit is quite clear to us in our everyday behavior. And we're going to have to balance that in a way, and we're going to have to see how the technology of blockchain and other technologies come in and can help us sort this out. I think by making the data manifest and secure on the chain, by essentially moving from a privacy to a property regime, we start to think about the value of our data, who owns that, who can realize the value in the long run, and do we really mind if people know certain things about us, and why is it that it bothers us? It seems to me one of the important things in this, without sort of going too much into it, is if we have much better protections for how we get treated when certain things about us are known, then we are less concerned about people knowing that data. One of the problems that we have within the US with our strange medical system is we often end up by being discriminated against, perhaps, if we have certain diseases, be them from a stigma or from a price we are charged. We need to deal more with the harm that knowing things does than who knows it, I think.
I would like to squeeze in one more question, very brief, if anyone has it. We're good? Oh, right here in the front.
Just go back, thank you, to the regulatory interface that both Daniel and Teos have answered. It's kind of a two-part quick question. One of the problems we have when we meet with regulatory agencies, I'm sorry, my name's Tom Gross. I'm an attorney in town and adjunct faculty at GW. One of the problems we have meeting with regulators is we sit down, we explain everything to them, and you say, okay, what do you think? And you get blank stares. And it's like they're afraid to say anything because the commission itself hasn't spoken or the chairman hasn't spoken yet. And so, like, how is this helpful to us if you can't give us some kind of, more definitive response? That's one of the problems we have. And I understand the regulators' problems. I mean, they're sorting through this like we are. But it's not helpful to us to sit there and get blank stares.
Oh,
the
what's
other
your question?
part of this question is for Walmart, when you set up this private blockchain, I'm just kind of curious, did you actually have to interface with any regulators on that? And who were they, and how did that go?
Just very briefly, because we're over time.
I'll be quick. I mean, I kind of already touched on this. I mean, there is a balance, and there's obviously only so far that a regulator in just a conversation can go, right? There's going to be high-level feedback guideposts that can be presented. Regulators are not going to provide legal advice. If you're looking for a certain degree of certainty and clarity, that's usually going to be pursued via no-action relief. So there are mechanisms available. So that's generally what I would say. But I think just these conversations and the questions that regulators can ask can help encourage thinking and explaining essentially how the regulator is going to view a particular issue. So that's the best I can tell you. There is a bit of a balance there as well.
Yeah, and I'll just say that the obvious intersection is with FDA, USDA, CDC during outbreak investigations or recalls, right? Right now, that interface is offline. It's not on the blockchain, so we're not exposing the blockchain to those regulators. The only time we've connected our blockchain with a regulatory agency as a pilot is the Customs and Border Protection pilot that I talked about, but that's about it. We're thinking through the governance structure of how do we enable direct access to the data that's on the blockchain with the regulators. So right now it's a private sector blockchain ecosystem.
Oversight for what you're doing.
Thanks, everyone, for coming out today to the ITIF blockchain event. Thanks, our panel. Please give them a round of applause. And if you have any follow-up questions, please come up here. We're happy to talk. Thank you.